A company has an application that runs as a replica set of multiple pods in an Amazon Elastic Kubernetes service, Amazon EKS cluster. The EKS cluster has nodes in multiple availability zones. The application generates many small files that must be accessible across all running instances of the application. The company needs to back up the files and retain the backups for 1 year. Which solution will meet these requirements while providing the fastest storage performance? A. Create an Amazon Elastic File System, Amazon EFS file system, and a mount target for each subnet that contains nodes in the EKS cluster. Configure the replica set to mount the file system. Direct the application to store files in the file system. Configure AWS backup to backup and retain copies of the data for 1 year. B. Create an Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS volume. Enable the EBS multi-attach feature. Configure the replica set to mount the EBS volume. Direct the application to store files in the EBS volume. Configure AWS backup to backup and retain copies of the data for 1 year. C. Create an Amazon S3 bucket. Configure the replica set to mount the S3 bucket. Direct the application to store files in the S3 bucket. Configure S3 versioning to retain copies of the data. Configure an S3 lifecycle policy to delete objects after 1 year. D. Configure the replica set to use the storage available on each of the running application pods to store the files locally. Use a third-party tool to back up the EKS cluster for 1 year. A solutions architect needs to assess a newly acquired company's portfolio of applications and databases. The solutions architect must create a business case to migrate the portfolio to AWS. The newly acquired company runs applications in an on-premises data center. The data center is not well documented. The solutions architect cannot immediately determine how many applications and databases exist. Traffic for the applications is variable. Some applications are batch processes that run at the end of each month. The solutions architect must gain a better understanding of the portfolio before a migration to AWS can begin. Which solution will meet these requirements? A. Use AWS Server Migration Service, AWS SMS, and AWS Database Migration Service, AWS DMS, to evaluate migration. Use AWS Service Catalog to understand application and database dependencies. B. Use AWS Application Migration Service. Run agents on the on-premises infrastructure. Manage the agents by using AWS Migration Hub. Use AWS Storage Gateway to assess local storage needs and database dependencies. C. Use Migration Evaluator to generate a list of servers. Build a report for a business case. Use AWS Migration Hub to view the portfolio. Use AWS Application Discovery Service to gain an understanding of application dependencies. D. Use AWS Control Tower in the destination account to generate an application portfolio. Use AWS Server Migration Service, AWS SMS, to generate deeper reports and a business case. Use a landing zone for core accounts and resources. A company has many separate AWS accounts and uses no central billing or management. Each AWS account hosts services for different departments in the company. The company has a Microsoft Azure Active Directory that is deployed. A solutions architect needs to centralize billing and management of the company's AWS accounts. The company wants to start using identity federation instead of manual user management. The company also wants to use temporary credentials instead of long-lived access keys. Which combination of steps will meet these requirements? Choose 3. A. Create a new AWS account to serve as a management account. Deploy an organization in AWS organizations. Invite each existing AWS account to join the organization. Ensure that each account accepts the invitation. B. Configure each AWS account's email address to be oz+@example.com so that account management email messages and invoices are sent to the same place. C. Deploy AWS IAM Identity Center, AWS Single Sign-On, in the management account. Connect IAM Identity Center to the Azure Active Directory. Configure IAM Identity Center for automatic synchronization of users and groups. D. Deploy an AWS Managed Microsoft AD directory in the management account. Share the directory with all other accounts in the organization by using AWS Resource Access Manager, AWS RAM. E. Create AWS IAM Identity Center, AWS Single Sign-On permission sets. Attach the permission sets to the appropriate IAM Identity Center groups and AWS accounts. F. Configure AWS Identity and Access Management (IAM) in each AWS account to use AWS Managed Microsoft AD for authentication and authorization. A company is building a hybrid environment that includes servers in an on-premises data center and in the AWS cloud. The company has deployed Amazon EC2 instances in 3 VPCs. Each VPC is in a different AWS region. The company has established an AWS Direct Connect connection to the data center from the region that is closest to the data center. The company needs the servers in the on-premises data center to have access to the EC2 instances in all 3 VPCs. The servers in the on-premises data center also must have access to AWS public services. Which combination of steps will meet these requirements with the least cost? Choose 2. A. Create a Direct Connect gateway in the region that is closest to the data center. Attach the Direct Connect connection to the Direct Connect gateway. Use the Direct Connect gateway to connect the VPCs in the other 2 regions. B. Set up additional Direct Connect connections from the on-premises data center to the other 2 regions. C. Create a private VIF. Establish an AWS site-to-site VPN connection over the private VIF to the VPCs in the other 2 regions. D. Create a public VIF. Establish an AWS site-to-site VPN connection over the public VIF to the VPCs in the other 2 regions. E. Use VPC peering to establish a connection between the VPCs across the regions. Create a private VIF with the existing Direct Connect connection to connect to the peered VPCs. A company is running an application in the AWS cloud. The core business logic is running on a set of Amazon EC2 instances in an auto-scaling group. An application load balancer, ALB, distributes traffic to the EC2 instances. Amazon Route 53 record ap.example.com is pointing to the ALB. The company's development team makes major updates to the business logic. The company has a rule that when changes are deployed, only 10% of customers can receive the new logic during a testing window. A customer must use the same version of the business logic during the testing window. How should the company deploy the updates to meet these requirements? A. Create a second ALB and deploy the new logic to a set of EC2 instances in a new auto-scaling group. Configure the ALB to distribute traffic to the EC2 instances. Update the Route 53 record to use weighted routing and point the record to both of the ALBs. B. Create a second target group that is referenced by the AL. Deploy the new logic to EC2 instances in this new target group. Update the ALB listener rule to use weighted target groups. Configure ALB target group stickiness. C. Create a new launch configuration for the auto-scaling group. Specify the launch configuration to use the auto-scaling rolling update policy, and set the max batch size option to 10. Replace the launch configuration on the auto-scaling group. Deploy the changes. D. Create a second auto-scaling group that is referenced by the ALB. Deploy the new logic on a set of EC2 instances in this new auto-scaling group. Change the ALB routing algorithm to least outstanding requests. LOR. Configure ALB session stickiness. A global manufacturing company plans to migrate the majority of its applications to AWS. However, the company is concerned about applications that need to remain within a specific country or in the company's central on-premises data center because of data regulatory requirements or requirements for latency of single-digit milliseconds. The company also is concerned about the applications that it hosts in some of its factory sites, where limited network infrastructure exists. The company wants a consistent developer experience so that its developers can build applications once and deploy on premises, in the cloud, or in a hybrid architecture. The developers must be able to use the same tools, APIs, and services that are familiar to them. Which solution will provide a consistent hybrid experience to meet these requirements? A. Migrate all applications to the closest AWS region that is compliant. Set up an AWS Direct Connect connection between the central on-premises data center and AWS. Deploy a Direct Connect gateway. B. Use AWS Snowball Edge storage, optimized devices for the applications that have data regulatory requirements or requirements for latency of single-digit milliseconds. Retain the devices on premises. Deploy AWS Wavelength to host the workloads in the factory sites. C. Install AWS Outposts for the applications that have data regulatory requirements or requirements for latency of single-digit milliseconds. Use AWS Snowball Edge Compute optimized devices to host the workloads in the factory sites. D. Migrate the applications that have data regulatory requirements or requirements for latency of single-digit milliseconds to an AWS local zone. Deploy AWS Wavelength to host the workloads in the factory sites. A company has an IoT platform that runs in an on-premises environment. The platform consists of a server that connects to IoT devices by using the MQTT protocol. The platform collects telemetry data from the devices at least once every 5 minutes. The platform also stores device metadata in a MongoDB cluster. An application that is installed on an on-premises machine runs periodic jobs to aggregate and transform the telemetry and device metadata. The application creates reports that users view by using another web application that runs on the same on-premises machine. The periodic jobs take 120 to 600 seconds to run. However, the web application is always running. The company is moving the platform to AWS and must reduce the operational overhead of the stack. Which combination of steps will meet these requirements with the least operational overhead? Choose 3. A. Use AWS Lambda functions to connect to the IoT devices. B. Configure the IoT devices to publish to AWS IoT Core. C. Write the metadata to a self-managed MongoDB database on an Amazon EC2 instance. A. Write the metadata to Amazon Document DB with MongoDB compatibility. E. Use AWS step functions state machines with AWS Lambda tasks to prepare the reports and to write the reports to Amazon S3. Use Amazon CloudFront with an S3 origin to serve the reports. F. Use an Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, Amazon EKS, cluster with Amazon EC2 instances to prepare the reports. Use an ingress controller in the EKS cluster to serve the reports. A solutions architect is creating an application that stores objects in an Amazon S3 bucket. The solutions architect must deploy the application in 2 AWS regions that will be used simultaneously. The objects in the 2 S3 buckets must remain synchronized with each other. Which combination of steps will meet these requirements with the least operational overhead? Choose 3. A. Create an S3 multi-region access point. Change the application to refer to the multi-region access point. B. Configure two-way S3 cross-region replication (CRR) between the 2 S3 buckets. C. Modify the application to store objects in each S3 bucket. D. Create an S3 lifecycle rule for each S3 bucket to copy objects from one S3 bucket to the other S3 bucket. E. Enable S3 versioning for each S3 bucket. F. Configure an event notification for each S3 bucket to invoke an AWS Lambda function to copy objects from one S3 bucket to the other S3 bucket. A company's public API runs as tasks on Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS. The tasks run on AWS Fargate behind an application load balancer, ALB, and are configured with service autoscaling for the tasks based on CPU utilization. This service has been running well for several months. Recently, API performance slowed down and made the application unusable. The company discovered that a significant number of SQL injection attacks had occurred against the API and that the API service had scaled to its maximum amount. A solutions architect needs to implement a solution that prevents SQL injection attacks from reaching the ECS API service. The solution must allow legitimate traffic through and must maximize operational efficiency. Which solution meets these requirements? A. Create a new AWS WAF Web ACL to monitor the HTTP requests and HTTPS requests that are forwarded to the ALB in front of the ECS tasks. B. Create a new AWS WAF bot control implementation. Add a rule in the AWS WAF bot control managed rule group to monitor traffic and allow only legitimate traffic to the ALB in front of the ECS tasks. C. Create a new AWS WAF Web ACL. Add a new rule that blocks requests that match the SQL database rule group. Set the Web ACL to allow all other traffic that does not match those rules. Attach the Web ACL to the ALB in front of the ECS tasks. D. Create a new AWS WAF Web ACL. Create a new empty IP set in AWS WAF. Add a new rule to the Web ACL to block requests that originate from IP addresses in the new IP set. Create an AWS Lambda function that scrapes the API logs for IP addresses that send SQL injection attacks, and add those IP addresses to the IP set. Attach the Web ACL to the ALB in front of the ECS tasks. A company is migrating an application to AWS. It wants to use fully managed services as much as possible during the migration. The company needs to store large important documents within the application with the following requirements. 1. The data must be highly durable and available. 2. The data must always be encrypted at rest and in transit. 3. The encryption key must be managed by the company and rotated periodically. Which of the following solutions should the solutions architect recommend? A. Deploy the storage gateway to AWS in File Gateway mode. Use Amazon EBS volume encryption using an AWS KMS key to encrypt the storage gateway volumes. B. Use Amazon S3 with a bucket policy to enforce HTTPS for connections to the bucket and to enforce server-side encryption and AWS KMS for object encryption. C. Use Amazon DynamoDB with SSL to connect to DynamoDB. Use an AWS KMS key to encrypt DynamoDB objects at rest. D. Deploy instances with Amazon EBS volumes attached to store this data. Use EBS volume encryption using an AWS KMS key to encrypt the data. A company has hundreds of AWS accounts. The company uses an organization in AWS organizations to manage all the accounts. The company has turned on all features. A finance team has allocated a daily budget for AWS costs. The finance team must receive an email notification if the organization's AWS costs exceed 80% of the allocated budget. A solutions architect needs to implement a solution to track the costs and deliver the notifications. Which solution will meet these requirements? A. In the organization's management account, use AWS budgets to create a budget that has a daily period. Add an alert threshold and set the value to 80%. Use Amazon Simple Notification Service, Amazon SNS, to notify the finance team. B. In the organization's management account, set up the Organizational View feature for AWS Trusted Advisor. Create an Organizational View report for cost optimization. Set an alert threshold of 80%. Configure notification preferences. Add the email addresses of the finance team. C. Register the organization with AWS Control Tower. Activate the optional cost control. Guardrail. Set a control guardrail parameter of 80%. Configure control guardrail notification preferences. Use Amazon Simple Notification Service, Amazon SNS, to notify the finance team. D. Configure the member accounts to save a daily AWS cost and usage report to an Amazon S3 bucket in the organization's management account. Use Amazon Event Bridge to schedule a daily Amazon Athena query to calculate the organization's costs. Configure Athena to send an Amazon CloudWatch alert if the total costs are more than 80% of the allocated budget. Use Amazon Simple Notification Service, Amazon SNS, to notify the finance team. A company is developing a new on-demand video application that is based on microservices. The application will have 5 million users at launch and will have 30 million users after 6 months. The company has deployed the application on Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, on AWS Fargate. The company developed the application by using ECS services that use the HTTPS protocol. A solutions architect needs to implement updates to the application by using blue/green deployments. The solution must distribute traffic to each ECS service through a load balancer. The application must automatically adjust the number of tasks in response to an Amazon CloudWatch alarm. Which solution will meet these requirements? A. Configure the ECS services to use the blue-green deployment type and a network load balancer. Request increases to the service quota for tasks per service to meet the demand. B. Configure the ECS services to use the blue-green deployment type and a network load balancer. Implement auto-scaling group for each ECS service by using the cluster autoscaler. C. Configure the ECS services to use the blue-green deployment type and an application load balancer. Implement an autoscaling group for each ECS service by using the cluster autoscaler. D. Configure the ECS services to use the blue-green deployment type and an application load balancer. Implement service autoscaling for each ECS service. A company uses a load balancer to distribute traffic to Amazon EC2 instances in a single availability zone. The company is concerned about security and wants a solutions architect to re-architect the solution to meet the following requirements. Inbound requests must be filtered for common vulnerability attacks. Rejected requests must be sent to a third-party auditing application. All resources should be highly available. Which solution meets these requirements? A company wants to optimize AWS data transfer costs and compute costs across developer accounts within the company's organization in AWS organizations. Developers can configure VPCs and launch Amazon EC2 instances in a single AWS region. The EC2 instances retrieve approximately 1 terabyte of data each day from Amazon S3. The developer activity leads to excessive monthly data transfer charges and DAD gateway processing charges between EC2 instances and S3 buckets, along with high compute costs. The company wants to proactively enforce approved architectural patterns for any EC2 instance and VPC infrastructure that developers deploy within the AWS accounts. The company does not want this enforcement to negatively affect the speed at which the developers can perform their tasks. Which solution will meet these requirements most cost-effectively? A. Create SCPs to prevent developers from launching unapproved EC2 instance types. Provide the developers with an AWS CloudFormation template to deploy an approved VPC configuration with S3 interface endpoints. Scope the developer's IAM permissions so that the developers can launch VPC resources only with CloudFormation. B. Create a daily forecasted budget with AWS budgets to monitor EC2 compute costs and S3 data transfer costs across the developer accounts. When the forecasted cost is 75% of the actual budget cost, send an alert to the developer teams. If the actual budget cost is 100%, create a budget action to terminate the developer's EC2 instances and VPC infrastructure. C. Create an AWS Service Catalog portfolio that users can use to create an approved VPC configuration with S3 gateway endpoints and approved EC2 instances. Share the portfolio with the developer accounts. Configure an AWS Service Catalog launch constraint to use an approved IAM role. Scope the developer's IAM permissions to allow access only to AWS Service Catalog. D. Create and deploy AWS config rules to monitor the compliance of EC2 and VPC resources in the developer AWS accounts. If developers launch unapproved EC2 instances, or if developers create VPCs without S3 gateway endpoints, perform a remediation action to terminate the unapproved resources. A company has an application that is deployed on Amazon EC2 instances behind an application load balancer, ALB. The instances are part of an autoscaling group. The application has unpredictable workloads and frequently scales out and in. The company's development team wants to analyze application logs to find ways to improve the application's performance. However, the logs are no longer available after instances scale in. Which solution will give the development team the ability to view the application logs after a scale-in event? A. Enable access logs for the ALB. Store the logs in an Amazon S3 bucket. B. Configure the EC2 instances to publish logs to Amazon CloudWatch logs by using the unified CloudWatch agent. C. Modify the auto-scaling group to use a step scaling policy. D. Instrument the application with AWS X-ray tracing. A company runs an application in an on-premises data center. The application gives users the ability to upload media files. The files persist in a file server. The web application has many users. The application server is overutilized, which causes data uploads to fail occasionally. The company frequently adds new storage to the file server. The company wants to resolve these challenges by migrating the application to AWS. Users from across the United States and Canada access the application. Only authenticated users should have the ability to access the application to upload files. The company will consider a solution that refactors the application, and the company needs to accelerate application development. Which solution will meet these requirements with the least operational overhead? A company operates an on-premises software as a service (SaaS) solution that ingests several files daily. The company provides multiple public SFTP endpoints to its customers to facilitate the file transfers. The customers add the SFTP endpoint IP addresses to their firewall allow list for outbound traffic. Changes to the SFTP endpoint IP addresses are not permitted. The company wants to migrate the SaaS solution to AWS and decrease the operational overhead of the file transfer service. Which solution meets these requirements? A. Register the customer-owned block of IP addresses in the company's AWS account. Create elastic IP addresses from the address pool and assign them to an AWS transfer for SFTP endpoint. Use AWS Transfer to store the files in Amazon S3. B. Add a subnet containing the customer-owned block of IP addresses to a VPC. Create elastic IP addresses from the address pool and assign them to an application load balancer, ALB. Launch EC2 instances hosting FTP services in an auto-scaling group behind the AL store, the files and attached Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS volumes. C. Register the customer-owned block of IP addresses with Amazon Route 53. Create alias records in Route 53 that point to a network load balancer, NLB. Launch EC2 instances hosting FTP services in an auto-scaling group behind the NLB. Store the files in Amazon S3. D. Register the customer-owned block of IP addresses in the company's AWS account. Create elastic IP addresses from the address pool and assign them to an Amazon S3 VPC endpoint. Enable SFTP support on the S3 bucket. An education company is running a web application used by college students around the world. The application runs in an Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, cluster in an auto-scaling group behind an application load balancer, ALB. A system administrator detects a weekly spike in the number of failed login attempts, which overwhelm the application's authentication service. All the failed login attempts originate from about 500 different IP addresses that change each week. A solutions architect must prevent the failed login attempts from overwhelming the authentication service. Which solution meets these requirements with the most operational efficiency? A. Use AWS Firewall Manager to create a security group and security group policy to deny access from the IP addresses. B. Create an AWS WAF Web ACL with a rate-based rule and set the rule action to block. Connect the Web ACL to the ALB. C. Use AWS Firewall Manager to create a security group and security group policy to allow access only to specific CIDR ranges. D. Create an AWS WAF Web ACL with an IP set match rule and set the rule action to block. Connect the Web ACL to the ALB. A large company runs workloads in VPCs that are deployed across hundreds of AWS accounts. Each VPC consists of public subnets and private subnets that span across multiple availability zones. NAT gateways are deployed in the public subnets and allow outbound connectivity to the Internet from the private subnets. A solutions architect is working on a hub-and-spoke design. All private subnets in the spoke VPCs must route traffic to the Internet through an egress VPC. The solutions architect already has deployed a NAT gateway in an egress VPC in a central AWS account. Which set of additional steps should the solutions architect take to meet these requirements? A. Create peering connections between the egress VPC and the spoke VPCs. Configure the required routing to allow access to the Internet. B. Create a transit gateway and share it with the existing AWS accounts. Attach existing VPCs to the transit gateway. Configure the required routing to allow access to the Internet. C. Create a transit gateway in every account. Attach the NAT gateway to the transit gateways. Configure the required routing to allow access to the Internet. D. Create an AWS private link connection between the egress VPC and the spoke VPCs. Configure the required routing to allow access to the Internet. A company is building an image service on the web that will allow users to upload and search random photos. At peak usage, up to 10,000 users worldwide will upload their images. The will then overlay text on the uploaded images, which will then be published on the company website. Which design should a solutions architect implement? A. Store the uploaded images in Amazon Elastic File System, Amazon EFS. Send application log information about each image to Amazon CloudWatch logs. Create a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances that use CloudWatch logs to determine which images need to be processed. Place processed images in another directory in Amazon EFS. Enable Amazon CloudFront and configure the origin to be the one of the EC2 instances in the fleet. B. Store the uploaded images in an Amazon S3 bucket and configure an S3 bucket event notification to send a message to Amazon's Simple Notification Service, Amazon SNS. Create a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances behind an application load balancer, ALB, to pull messages from Amazon SNS to process the images and place them in Amazon Elastic File System, Amazon EFS. Use Amazon CloudWatch metrics for the SNS message volume to scale out EC2 instances. Enable Amazon CloudFront and configure the origin to be the ALB in front of the EC2 instances. C. Store the uploaded images in an Amazon S3 bucket and configure an S3 bucket event notification to send a message to the Amazon Simple Queue service, Amazon SQS Queue. Create a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances to pull messages from the SQS queue to process the images and place them in another S3 bucket. Use Amazon CloudWatch metrics for queue depth to scale out EC2 instances. Enable Amazon CloudFront and configure the origin to be the S3 bucket that contains the processed images. D. Store the uploaded images on a shared Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS, volume mounted to a fleet of Amazon EC2 spot instances. Create an Amazon DynamoDB table that contains information about each uploaded image and whether it has been processed. Use an Amazon Event Bridge rule to scale out EC2 instances. Enable Amazon CloudFront and configure the origin to reference an elastic load balancer in front of the fleet of EC2 instances. A company has a Windows-based desktop application that is packaged and deployed to the user's Windows machines. The company recently acquired another company that has employees who primarily use machines with a Linux operating system. The acquiring company has decided to migrate and rehost the Windows-based desktop application to AWS. All employees must be authenticated before they use the application. The acquiring company uses Active Directory on premises, but wants a simplified way to manage access to the application on AWS for all the employees. Which solution will rehost the application on AWS with the least development effort? A. Set up and provision an Amazon Workspace's virtual desktop for every employee. Implement authentication by using Amazon Cognito identity pools. Instruct employees to run the application from their provisioned Workspace's virtual desktops. B. Create an auto-scaling group of Windows-based Amazon EC2 instances. Join each EC2 instance to the company's Active Directory domain. Implement authentication by using the Active Directory that is running on premises. Instruct employees to run the application by using a Windows Remote Desktop. C. Use an Amazon AppStream 2.0 image builder to create an image that includes the application and the required configurations. Provision an AppStream 2.0 on-demand fleet with dynamic fleet auto-scaling policies for running the image. Implement authentication by using AppStream 2.0 user pools. Instruct the employees to access the application by starting browser-based AppStream 2.0 streaming sessions. D. Refactor and containerize the application to run as a web-based application. Run the application in Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, on AWS Fargate, with step scaling policies. Implement authentication by using Amazon Cognito user pools. Instruct the employees to run the application from their browsers. A company plans to deploy a new private intranet service on Amazon EC2 instances inside a VPC. An AWS site-to-site VPN connects the VPC to the company's on-premises network. The new service must communicate with existing on-premises services. The on-premises services are accessible through the use of hostnames that reside in the company. Example, DNS zone. This DNS zone is wholly hosted on premises and is available only on the company's private network. A solutions architect must ensure that the new service can resolve hostnames on the company. Example domain to integrate with existing services. Which solution meets these requirements? A. Create an empty private zone in Amazon Route 53 for company. Example. Add an additional NS record to the company's on-premises company. Example zone that points to the authoritative name servers for the new private zone in Route 53. B. Turn on DNS hostnames for the VPC. Configure a new outbound endpoint with Amazon Route 53 Resolver. Create a resolver rule to forward requests for company. Example to the on-premises name servers. C. Turn on DNS hostnames for the VP. Configure a new inbound resolver endpoint with Amazon Route 53 Resolver. Configure and the on-premises DNS server to forward requests for company. Example to the new resolver. D. Use AWS Systems Manager to configure a run document that will install a host file that contains any required hostnames. Use an Amazon Event Bridge rule to run the document when an instance is entering the running state. A company is expanding. The company plans to separate its resources into hundreds of different AWS accounts in multiple AWS regions. A solutions architect must recommend a solution that denies access to any operations outside of specifically designated regions. Which solution will meet these requirements? A. Create IAM roles for each account. Create IAM policies with conditional allow permissions that include only approved regions for the accounts. B. Create an organization in AWS organizations. Create IAM users for each account. Attach a policy to each user to block access to regions where an account cannot deploy infrastructure. C. Launch an AWS Control Tower landing zone. Create OUs and attach SCPs that deny access to run services outside of the approved regions. D. Enable AWS Security Hub in each account. Create controls to specify the regions where an account can deploy infrastructure. A solutions architect is reviewing a company's process for taking snapshots of Amazon RDS DB instances. The company takes automatic snapshots every day and retains the snapshots for 7 days. The solutions architect needs to recommend a solution that takes snapshots every 6 hours and retains the snapshots for 30 days. The company uses AWS organizations to manage all of its AWS accounts. The company needs a consolidated view of the health of the RDS snapshots. Which solution will meet these requirements with the least operational overhead? A. Turn on the cross-account management feature in AWS Backup. Create a backup plan that specifies the frequency and retention requirements. Add a tag to the DB instances. Apply the backup plan by using tags. Use AWS Backup to monitor the status of the backups. B. Turn on the cross-account management feature in Amazon RDS. Create a snapshot global policy that specifies the frequency and retention requirements. Use the RDS console in the management account to monitor the status of the backups. C. Turn on the cross-account management feature in AWS CloudFormation. From the management account, deploy a CloudFormation stack set that contains a backup plan from AWS Backup that specifies the frequency and retention requirements. Create an AWS Lambda function in the management account to monitor the status of the backups. Create an Amazon Event Bridge rule in each account to run the Lambda function on a schedule. D. Configure AWS Backup in each account. Create an Amazon Data Lifecycle Manager lifecycle policy that specifies the frequency and retention requirements. Specify the DB instances as the target resource. Use the Amazon Data Lifecycle Manager console in each member account to monitor the status of the backups. A company runs an application on AWS. The company curates data from several different sources. The company uses proprietary algorithms to perform data transformations and aggregations. After the company performs ETL processes, the company stores the results in Amazon Redshift tables. The company sells this data to other companies. The company downloads the data as files from the Amazon Redshift tables and transmits the files to several data customers by using FTP. The number of data customers has grown significantly. The management of the data customers has become difficult. The company will use AWS Data Exchange to create a data product that the company can use to share data with customers. The company wants to confirm the identities of the customers before the company shares data. The customers also need access to the most recent data when the company publishes the data. Which solution will meet these requirements with the least operational overhead? A. Use AWS Data Exchange for APIs to share data with customers. Configure subscription verification. In the AWS account of the company that produces the data, Create an Amazon API Gateway Data API Service integration with Amazon Redshift. Require the data customers to subscribe to the data product. B. In the AWS account of the company that produces the data, create an AWS Data Exchange data share by connecting AWS Data Exchange to the Redshift cluster. Configure subscription verification. Require the data customers to subscribe to the data product. C. Download the data from the Amazon Redshift tables to an Amazon S3 bucket periodically. Use AWS Data Exchange for S3 to share data with customers. Configure subscription verification. Require the data customers to subscribe to the data product. D. Publish the Amazon Redshift data to an open data on AWS Data Exchange. Require the customers to subscribe to the data product in AWS Data Exchange. In the AWS account of the company that produces the data, attach IAM resource-based policies to the Amazon Redshift tables to allow access only to verified AWS accounts. A company's solutions architect is evaluating an AWS workload that was deployed several years ago. The application tier is stateless and runs on a single large Amazon EC2 instance that was launched from an AMI. The application stores data in a MySQL database that runs on a single EC2 instance. The CPU utilization on the application server EC2 instance often reaches 100% and causes the application to stop responding. The company manually installs patches on the instances. Patching has caused downtime in the past. The company needs to make the application highly available. Which solution will meet these requirements with the least development me? A. Move the application tier to AWS Lambda functions in the existing VPC. Create an application load balancer to distribute traffic across the Lambda functions. Use Amazon Guard Duty to scan the Lambda functions. Migrate the database to Amazon Document DB with MongoDB compatibility. B. Change the EC2 instance type to a smaller Graviton-powered instance type. Use the existing AMI to create a launch template for an auto-scaling group. Create an application load balancer to distribute traffic across the instances in the auto-scaling group. Set the auto-scaling group to scale based on CPU utilization. Migrate the database to Amazon DynamoDB. C. Move the application tier to containers by using Docker. Run the containers on Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS, with EC2 instances. Create an application load balancer to distribute traffic across the ECS cluster. Configure the ECS cluster to scale based on CPU utilization. Migrate the database to Amazon Neptune. B. Create a Now AMI that is configured with AWS Systems Manager Agent, SSM Agent. Use the new AMI to create a launch template for an auto-scaling group. Use smaller instances in the auto-scaling group. Create an application load balancer to distribute traffic across the instances in the auto-scaling group. Set the auto-scaling group to scale based on CPU utilization. Migrate the database to Amazon Aurora MySQL. A company has its cloud infrastructure on AWS. A solutions architect needs to define the infrastructure as code. The infrastructure is currently deployed in one AWS region. The company's business expansion plan includes deployments in multiple regions across multiple AWS accounts. What should the solutions architect do to meet these requirements? A. Use AWS CloudFormation templates. Add IAM policies to control the various accounts. Deploy the templates across the multiple regions. B. Use AWS organizations. Deploy AWS CloudFormation templates from the management account. Use AWS Control Tower to manage deployments across accounts. C. Use AWS organizations and AWS CloudFormation stacksets. Deploy a CloudFormation template from an account that has the necessary IAM permissions. D. Use nested stacks with AWS CloudFormation templates. Change the region by using nested stacks. A company wants to change its internal cloud billing strategy for each of its business units. Currently, the cloud governance team shares reports for overall cloud spending with the head of each business unit. The company uses AWS organizations to manage the separate AWS accounts for each business unit. The existing tagging standard in organizations includes the application, environment, and owner. The cloud governance team wants a centralized solution, so each business unit receives monthly reports on its cloud spending. The solution should also send notifications for any cloud spending that exceeds a set threshold. Which solution is the most cost-effective way to meet these requirements? A. Configure AWS budgets in each account and configure budget alerts that are grouped by application, environment, and owner. Add each business unit to an Amazon SNS topic for each alert. Use Cost Explorer in each account to create monthly reports for each business unit. B. Configure AWS budgets in the organization's management account and configure budget alerts that are grouped by application, environment, and owner. Add each business unit to an Amazon SNS topic for each alert. Use Cost Explorer in the organization's management account to create monthly reports for each business unit. C. Configure AWS budgets in each account and configure budget alerts that are grouped by application, environment, and owner. Add each business unit to an Amazon SNS topic for each alert. Use the AWS billing and cost management dashboard in each account to create monthly reports for each business unit. D. Enable AWS cost and usage reports in the organization's management account and configure reports grouped by application, environment, and owner. Create an AWS Lambda function that processes AWS cost and usage reports, sends budget alerts, and sends monthly reports to each business unit's email list. A financial services company in North America plans to release a new online web application to its customers on AWS. The company will launch the application in the US East 1 region on Amazon EC2 instances. The application must be highly available and must dynamically scale to meet user traffic. The company also wants to implement a disaster recovery environment for the application in the US West 1 region by using active-passive failover. Which solution will meet these requirements?